Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and there is in the Jewish world a special sensitivity to those who endured the darkest night in human history, the Shoah, the Holocaust. A sensitivity to the survivor, and an understanding that the second generation also has been burdened with a unique feeling for the past. For many survivors, and for many in the second generation, there are no grandparents, no aunts, no uncles, no cousins. And what's most remarkable is how the overwhelming number of survivors, and those of the second generation, have built wonderful lives for themselves and for their children, and how so many of them have remained intimately and passionately involved in Jewish life, in Jewish institutions, with the State of Israel, in sustaining and enhancing the Jewish future. Well, on this edition of L'Chaim, I am honored to be sitting with just such an individual who's making a real difference on the American Jewish scene, who's defending the State of Israel, working in the trenches in the war against BDS and anti-Semitism, masquerading as anti-Zionism, and doing everything she can to promote Jewish life and Jewish identity. And she's someone who has become a close personal friend for whom I have enormous admiration. It is my privilege to introduce to you Dr. Naomi Vilko, who, in addition to being a board-certified psychiatrist in private practice in Princeton, New Jersey, is a profoundly committed Jew, a member of 3 synagogues, many pro-Israel organizations, and she serves on the boards of CAMRA, the JNF, JerusalemU.com, and JBS. Naomi, what a pleasure it is to have you at this table. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for your wonderful introduction.
Thank you. Okay, Naomi, you're second generation.
Correct.
What was it like growing up with parents who were survivors? And, how do you feel it shaped you?
Actually, I was lucky in one sense that my parents didn't have the kind of symptoms that as a psychiatrist I would say post-traumatic stress disorder, but are very common in survivors: nightmares, panic attacks, depression. They did not. Neither one of them. I don't remember a single incident.
Your mother's name?
Olga Vilko.
And your father?
William Vilko.
And what do people call him?
People called him Bela.
Bela. Olga
which is
and
like
Bela.
Billy in Hungarian.
Very nice. Were they from Hungary?
A complicated question.
Yes.
So my father was born in Austro-Hungary. My mother was born in Czechoslovakia, the same town. Shortly after the Munich Agreement, that area, Carpatherus land we call it, or Subcarpathian Ruthenia, was given back to Hungary. Then they got visas, unfortunately, to Auschwitz. And after concentration camp, when the war was over, the Second World War, it was Czechoslovakia for a few months until it was occupied and annexed by Stalin. So it was the USSR until the fall of the Soviet Union, and now it's the Ukraine, and I don't know what it'll be next week.
Are you saying both of your parents were in Auschwitz?
Yes.
How did they survive?
A lot was luck. Like if you made a decision to go to the left versus the right, if you volunteered for work detail or didn't volunteer, it could mean the difference between life and death. So part of it was luck, and part of it was physical and emotional strength, and probably my mother is on JBS TV, and she gives a very good summary of what happens to her, including as a Hebrew school teacher, sort of lesson in history. My father died when I was 10 years old, so I know less about him, and it was before there was any documentation. So actually, a few years ago, I got a very interesting series of documents from the U.S. Holocaust Museum. He was actually in forced slave labor in Kiev on and off for 2 years after being a regular soldier in the Czech army a few years prior for a year. And then he was in 5 concentration camps. So when Auschwitz was liberated, he was there, unfortunately. So what happened was the people were on, quote, death marches. And he went from he's moving towards Germany, west, so from Poland. So he was on apparently 5 of those. And in fact, ironically, they explained to me in these documents his name changes. In 1948, when my parents were already in the United States, they used his file, not him personally, in the Munich trial. Because they didn't just sue on behalf of these survivors or those killed, they named individuals. So that's what I know. I actually don't remember all the names of all the camps.
You were 10 when he died.
Correct.
Do you remember him at all?
Oh, yes.
What was his tone? What was he like?
He was typical for that time Hungarian gentleman. He was very, what we called, refined, well-spoken. My parents, as soon as they got to this country, continued their English schooling. They knew some when they came here, so they right away enrolled in school. So I didn't have the experience of a lot of survivors' children. My parents only spoke to me in English. They spoke to each other in Hungarian when they didn't want me to understand, which backfired, of course. So that's how I learned, but only receptive language. And he was a businessman. He was, so he went into business in Europe, and then he started again here.
When you say he was refined, does that mean he was formal, and was he formal with you as his daughter?
No, he was formal in business, like he presented himself well.
And how was he to you?
He was extremely affectionate. And Mark, you know me, I was naughty sometimes. He never even raised his voice. A lot of European parents, especially survivors, hit their children. Never. I mean, he was very loving, and especially since he died when I was so young, I was lucky because he spent a lot of time with me alone. I'm an only child, and he lost a son and his first wife in the war. So I'm sure he made an extra effort with me, and he was very grateful that he was able to have a daughter. And so my parents worked split shifts. So when my mother was working, I was with him, every day. So that was lovely.
Where were you?
He was very wonderful father.
That's lovely. Where were you when he died?
I was actually in the bed next to him. So he was healthy until he died. He was...
He dies relatively young.
Yes, he was 53, and his parents were 73 and 78 when they died. So he was obviously, because of all the things he went through, he had high blood pressure at 39, and there was no medication. So, I mean, he was in great shape. He wasn't overweight. He didn't drink. He didn't smoke. So my father used to leave early in the morning for work, and I guess I don't really remember, but I guess I would hear something. So I would get up and go lie down next to my mom, and that's when my mother realized he hadn't gotten up. Mm-hmm. So I was actually there.
Okay. I assume, first of all, under any circumstance, it's going to be hard for a child and a wife to experience this kind of trauma and horror and death of somebody you love so much. It seems to me that it feels it would be compounded by the journey they had taken and where they had been, and they'd managed to come to America. What's it do to your mother, and what's it do to you?
So my mother was, that year, my parents were not very observant after the war. My father, in fact, came from a Hasidic dynasty, rabbinic dynasty on one side of his family, from my grandmother. But my mother wore black for a year, just to give you an idea. She, financially, we were left in a terrible situation. My mother didn't understand exactly the real estate business that he was in. And I mean, my mother had lost her brother and her parents and most of her extended family. So they were in the United States. The sort of strange thing is, I had a lot of family in the United States. However, my parents hadn't seen them mostly their whole lives. So I had an uncle who left Europe before my father was born, for example. So my mother really felt alone with no backup.
No support family anywhere.
No, and people were not very supportive. For me, I was very frightened. I also thought my mom would die because, I mean, she looked good too. And I was worried we'd go on welfare.
By the way, she has not died to this day.
She is going to be 95, but don't tell her I told you. In September, before the Jewish holidays. She's a very strong woman. And part of it is that after he died, I think she just had no choice. She used to say to me, if I didn't have to go to work, I don't know what would have happened to me, but I had to go to work. So
okay, I interrupted you. You said it was scary for you.
Very scary. And I was very, very close with my father, more so than with my mother. And I probably spent more alone time with him because my mother would work when I was in school. So I was devastated. So in fact, that affected me much more than me personally, than the fact that my parents were in concentration camp. But to compound matters for me more than for my mom, my father was closest with his one relative that was a physician that died of a massive heart attack 2 years later. And that was like the person that would have been, for me, sort of like an uncle, because they grew up together. So that was also difficult.
But wait, you keep losing people
Yes.
as a child.
Yeah.
It affects a child, does it not?
Yes.
Yes. You chose to go into psychiatry.
Right.
I don't know why, and whether it has any connection. But I'm asking you not only as someone who lived it, but as a trained psychiatrist yourself. When you look at the kind of childhood you had, and when you look at the way in which you've seen other second-generation children become adults, talk to me for a moment about how you feel they cope, how you coped, and what you feel all of us should be more sensitive to and understanding of.
Well, I don't think that the average person really understands on an emotional level what it's like to grow up the way survivors' children have grown up. Because it's hard to explain. Actually, our mutual friend, Thane Rosenbaum, entitled a book, Secondhand Smoke. And that is the best kind of description I've read in, a few words.
That somehow the second generation is affected.
Yes.
And he's using the metaphor of lung cancer. But in essence, the smoke of the crematorium and the Holocaust does really seep into the living life of the second generation.
Yes.
And would you think that's true for most second generation children?
So I've been a psychiatrist for 44 years. I actually admitted people to the psychiatric ward that were my parents' friends for insomnia. I bring that up because at that time, there was no such disorder as post-traumatic stress disorder. The medical profession actually didn't want to deal with it, couldn't deal with it, didn't understand. As far as the children go, I'd also say that survivor has now become a different word than it was when I was growing up.
How so?
Now people are survivors if they were in the Battle of Leningrad, if they escaped from Germany in 1933, if they were, like my father, survived forced labor. Yes, that half the people, Hungarian Jews, died that were in forced labor. They were only men. However, my parents, when they spoke about survivor, they meant survivor of concentration camp, which is not to diminish the suffering of any of the other people, nor the effect of being a refugee has on children. Refugees from other atrocities also carry baggage, but this is really on a different scale. So that's one factor. Then
by the way, when you use the word survivor,
I mean survivor of forced labor or camp.
Or forced labor as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
But some sort of torture.
Yes. And when I use the word survivor, I'm imagining somebody who survived as you described.
Right.
Primarily a camp or some other kind of enslavement. It's not somebody who simply got out of Germany. At the same time, you're right, the definition has expanded in the Jewish community so that anybody who was in Germany as Hitler came to power and was fortunate enough to escape, they're considered that they had survived what ultimately happened to the Jews of primarily Eastern and Western Europe, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. All right, so for you, you're talking about as a psychiatrist,
survivors' children. So I would say that first of all, it's not a simple question, as none of your questions are simple, Mark, which I appreciate, because most interviewers ask very simple questions and they want a simple answer. So there are a number of factors. As you know, my husband, Sid Goldfarb, is also the son of 2 survivors, of Polish survivors.
And he is a doctor.
And he is a
physician,
doctor as
right.
well. So I would say that some families, most common was that the parents didn't talk about it. And you picked up this secondhand smoke, the grief, the fact that other children were going to family reunions and you never heard of such a thing, right? That your parents were speaking another language, that there were pictures in your house, if there were pictures, of people you never met, some of whom you were afraid to ask about, right? So so the people that spoke about it, they did better because, as you know, psychiatry is getting out your feelings, and they were able to express it, and their children did better. The people that didn't speak about it, I think it affected the children more. And then it also depended how many symptoms your parents had. But I would say, so my husband and I, even though all 4 of our parents were in concentration camp, we grew up differently. And it affected
you
us.
mean you and your husband grew up differently?
Grew up differently.
How did he grow up differently from you?
His parents didn't talk about it.
And your mother did?
My parents did. His father didn't die until we were already adults. His parents were much more symptomatic. And his parents were less, I would call it, refined. But if you look at children of survivors in general, there are some that are clearly very mentally disturbed. I think that many children of survivors, which I felt like this as well, I'm sure many of us, whether we admitted it to ourselves or not, wished we weren't Jewish. And many of our parents and ourselves independently either became extremely religious or extremely secular. There was sort of no in between.
I understand. I don't know if you'll find this interesting. You were the first person I've ever heard say this, that there was, you're saying, among the second generation as well as survivors
Yes.
themselves, wishing you weren't Jewish.
Yes.
And why do you think that's true?
Well, if you look at it from my point of view, and in fact, people in my parents' generation, now my father was born in 1909, okay? In my parents' generation, intermarried. People after the war, as we called it, married non-Jewish people and had non-Jewish children. Of course, you know Madeleine Albright and Kati Martone, Holbrook's wife, both, one Hungarian, one Czech, were Czech. Their parents actually converted and didn't tell them that they were Jewish, that they were Jewish. So that's, yes.
And there were moments when you wished you were not Jewish?
Yes.
By the way, do you still wish that?
Sometimes. Because for us, for me, it's very real. So the fact that from one day to the next, things could change. Because don't forget, so uniquely to the people from my parents' area of the world, there weren't that many Jews in Czechoslovakia. My parents grew up in a liberal democracy with rights for all religions and all ethnicities. There was still discrimination, but it was out of their complete experience, was completely different than the average Polish and Russian Jew. And during Austro-Hungary, before the creation of Czechoslovakia, My mother said her grandfather used to say, has been 50 years of peace that we never experienced. So this was a long period of time. And then suddenly they were killed just because of their race. So for me, when I hear things on the college campuses, I can't just say it's not going to happen here, because that's what my parents said. And Elie Wiesel spoke about that at Yom HaShoah, which you televised. He said, "Why didn't you tell us? Everyone knew what was happening and we didn't know." He was in that same area, Subcarpathian Ruthenia in Siget, where my grandmother was from, and they just had no idea.
Mm-hmm. Do you also love being Jewish?
Yes, and as I've gotten older, I really appreciate it. So to my family, the way I grew up was Israel was evidence that there was a God. Not because Israel was created as a result of the Shoah, but because they were so privileged just to have come to this country when independence was declared that they never thought they'd see in their lifetime. Actually, even though my mother went to Hebrew gymnasium because her father was a Zionist and he prayed for it, he didn't make it, he was killed. But this was, and always so proud of Israel and so proud of what the Jewish people could achieve in this country, which is a miracle. There's never been a period of time where Jews have been able to achieve what they want. You know, the fact that my husband, Sid, and I were the first ones in our immediate families, I mentioned that my cousin was a doctor, that went to college or medical school, that, was heard of even in this country a generation before. So I feel proud that when Jews have the opportunity, they use it, and that we're people of the book. And this is the way I grew up. Naomi, the one thing they can't take from you is your education. Because my father's parents wanted him to go to medical school, so it's no accident that I went. And he said to me, and this was, before I was rebellious in my teens, right? He said to me, "Naomi, don't be a lawyer, because if you have to move, it's worthless piece of paper. Go to college and become an engineer or a doctor. Something with a license that is transferable." So we were very motivated to do that for fear, for showing that we're worth something. Because my parents had tattoos. My mother has a tattoo on her arm. A number. And
do you know the number?
No.
Why?
Why?
You never needed to know.
No. Interestingly, though, I have all my father's documents, including his birth certificate, and on his citizenship document, which my parents became citizens as soon as they could, which I was very proud of all these things, that most of the survivors, that's what they did. They came here as refugees, they tried, some ended up and are still suffering, very poor. Not everyone was successful. People see the survivors that, made it. But whatever, they took pride in being American. They wanted to be American. They wanted to contribute the best they could, and they became citizens. Mm-hmm. So on my father's citizenship paper, it has his number, mm-hmm. which I also don't know.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting to hear how you describe it, because the experience that your parents had And to use Thane's metaphor, the secondhand smoke you've lived with. It affects the way a person looks at the world, at this country, at life, at the future. The extent to which one is not confident in the future. So your father is saying to you, after he comes to America, you may one day have to move. Mm-hmm. So you should have an education that is transferable. Right. The reason he said it to you is he's imagining there's no guarantee that his daughter is going to be able to stay here, right?
Right.
You understand that for many Jews who do not have this background, it's very different. And today especially, when you talk to the next generation, your children's generation, many American Jews have no sense any longer, not only of the Shoah, but even of anti-Semitism. They have, and this is blessed, they've grown up with perhaps never experiencing a moment of anti-Semitism. And therefore, they view Jewish life, they view the Jewish past, they view the state of Israel, and they view their role in America very differently than your father, or I dare say you. Would you think that's fair?
Well, our children look at it differently than most children of their generation. My children are in their 30s, as you know.
They're third generation now.
Yeah, third generation. Look, the unique thing about my parents is that they lived in America. They lived in the closest country. They had an American First Lady, in Czechoslovakia, an American Constitution. English was taught there. So, if you came here from Poland, like my in-laws did, I think actually you were more secure, although never completely secure. But all the survivors wanted their children to be accepted in this country and to be educated. I always felt that was the best thing about being Jewish. The value on intellect, the value on being literate, the value on being conversant, and you're a rabbi, and questioning God. I have a very good friend who converted from Catholicism. And he said, and I said, well, what, are you sorry yet? I said to him. He comes to a lot of our educational programs, pro-Israel educational programs. And when you converted, there wasn't all this anti-Semitism, it's back. And he said, the major difference is questioning, that he studies every year. So here is another example. Like, I appreciate Israel. I feel it's my duty to do what I can, since I didn't serve in the IDF like I intended, that I should do what I can to support Israel, that's tikkun olam after my family. But it's the devotion to questioning the rabbi. You don't get up there and expect to speak and everyone says, yes, Rabbi Golub.
Absolutely
right?
Absolutely right. Yes. By the way, the freedom to doubt and be a skeptic and to question and to challenge, I think you're so right, is at the essence of what the Jewish tradition is about. So I give you a lot of credit for saying it that way. You talked about security. Are American Jews secure in America from your perspective, Naomi?
I first started talking actually about my background after 9/11 because it was too eerily similar. People went to work and they were blown up because they were American at work. the terrorists they wanted to kill as many Americans as possible, and my son at that time worked across the street from the World Trade Center. He survived. He was on a plane. So it was a little tense in my house around that period. His building collapsed. Fortunately, being a German company, they were more alert, and everyone was evacuated very quickly. They took it seriously because in Europe there had been much more terrorism. So after that, and I knew that there'd be children whose parents perished, and that people would feel sorry for them at all too brief moment. So I felt at that point I should start talking about my experiences. And that's when I really got involved in, other than the synagogue and family, in communal Jewish organizations. So the next thing that happened was that there began to be racist, anti-Semitic vitriol on college campuses. And that, to me, is a very bad sign. So no, at this point in time, I am truly alarmed. I do not honestly feel that someone's going to come to my home and take me to concentration camp. On the other hand, I'm worried for Israel, and I am worried about the treatment of American Jews who are identifiable, like someone wearing a kippah was beat up on a very nice street in Manhattan on the Upper East Side. I'm concerned. Some students ended up in the emergency room, so it wasn't only hate speech, it was actually aggression. So I'm really very concerned with the campuses. And since I first got involved with CAMERA and AIPAC and JNF and JBS, Shalom TV, and AJC, all these different organizations, it's gotten so much worse, Mark. I mean, it's just, I really actually never thought it would get quite this bad. And in fact, in Princeton, New Jersey, where I live and work, my husband and I and Rabbi Wolkoff, my rabbi, in New Jersey. I have many rabbis. You're my rabbi. I have a lot of rabbis. But anyway, he has the congregation I belong to in New Jersey, and you interviewed him. You should all watch that. So he and I and my husband went to a Princeton Divest program at Princeton University. As we were sitting there, I thought, who is going to have a heart attack first? It was so awful. I imagined that I was at a university in Budapest after the Nazis had their pact with the Hungarians, who were allies of the Nazis. I mean, it was really, I never thought that I'd hear hate speech like that. Mm-hmm. So they say it's about Israel. But Israel is the one Jewish country, and my thesis is that there are a lot worse countries in the world that are murdering people wholesale, and there's slavery, and the 85% of genital mutilated women in Egypt. And I'm a feminist. I mean, I wouldn't have become a doctor, if I wasn't. The feminist movement is not speaking out on behalf of women. And they're talking about Israel. They're only talking about Israel. There's no boycott movement of any other country. It's not about Israel. It's about Jews.
Mm-hmm. In any way, in any sense, do you feel your parents were heroic?
I think they were heroic in the way they lived after the war. I think the way I look at it, they survived the war. Heroism, has many different forms, just like survivors. So I would think as a hero, someone that, saved other people, that risked their lives.
That's a different kind of hero.
Right.
I meant in terms of the way they lived their lives once they came here.
Yes.
There is something heroic,
yes,
isn't there?
Yes. I think they made a decision to live. The second big decision that people don't often think about, many survivors chose not to have children because they didn't want to bring children into this kind of a world, a civilized country that would do something like this. So my parents started over, and that was very heroic, and they sacrificed a lot to have a child. Mm-hmm. And they actually tried to have more children. Mm-hmm. They just didn't.
And how do you feel about the way in which the phrase concentration camp now is used to describe any time a political system separates one group from another? In other words, does anything about the way in which the term concentration camp is now used, does anything about that offend you?
It's revolting to me. And the most revolting was I brought my mother to hear one of the first debates Alan Dershowitz had at the 92nd Street Y with Jeremy Ben-Ami, the founder of J Street. And, when the FBI vets someone, they look at who people hang out with, who are their friends, right? Which organizations they belong to. So, luckily, I managed to get my mother into the Y without seeing the signs that were comparing Israel to Auschwitz. Mm-hmm. That is revolting.
It's obscene.
Obscene, and those were Jeremy Ben-Ami's supporters. So to me, I didn't need to hear the debate. It's really disgusting. And then when they say apartheid, South Africa had apartheid. Israel doesn't have apartheid. The Arab world has apartheid. In fact, they've managed to cleanse themselves of most of the Christians and practically all of the Jews. There's a chart that shows each country and how many Jews lived there and how many are left. It's just unbelievable. Mm-hmm. I mean, there were 1 million Jews in the surrounding countries that were there probably since the destruction of the Second Temple.
Mm-hmm. I often hear when I'm listening to radio, watching television, some scholar will talk about how America behaves or how European country behaves, and they will use the word concentration camp. And I say to myself, what does this mean about your understanding of what the German concentration camp was, Auschwitz being the worst, but not by any means the only one?
No.
These were death camps where people in tens of thousands a day were gassed and thrown into ovens. And it's not about being behind barbed wire. Barbed wire is terrible, but that doesn't make it a concentration camp. And I'm offended by the use of the word concentration camp when it has nothing to do with what you and I understand a concentration camp was. And I don't think everything that is a horrible event in this world is a Holocaust. I think that the word Holocaust also has a certain sanctity to it. And I resent the way in which that word has been trivialized. You have any comment?
Yes, I totally agree with you. And just to give you a view from a survivor, Schindler's List was wonderful to make. I mean, I'm very grateful that that film got made. There were others, but that was really the most popular and got shown everywhere in discussions. My mother and her friends went to see it. And there, I called my mother up and said, so what did you all think? And she said, we came out of the theater and we said to each other, this, they showed kindergarten. I mean, our experience was so much worse, they couldn't show it. But, you know, just so you know, someone should say how much worse it really was.
Exactly, exactly. So there is something in America called the Claims Conference. It was set up to take money that was basically restored from other countries that participated either overtly or either implicitly or explicitly in the Holocaust, and took money from Jewish families who were then sent off to concentration camps. And the idea was there were going to be reparations, there were going to be money restored. This money would be administered by a claims conference, which would distribute money to survivors, especially those who were in need, who did not have enough really to survive well, sometimes did not have enough to eat and to have a warm home. Now, you talked about the fact that when your father died, he left you and your mother in a very difficult financial position. Throughout your life, have there been moments when the Claims Conference has been a real help to you? Do you have any criticisms of the Claims Conference that you think we should know?
So my personal interaction with the Claims Conference is that I don't remember the year it came into being, but my father died in 1962. My parents applied directly with their own German lawyer for reparations. At that time, if you weren't a German citizen at the time of the war, if you were from an occupied country, which I love the term, the way people use the term occupation as well, means something different to me, and refugee. So you had to prove that you were physically injured. This had nothing to do with the Claims Conference. This was Germany, and negotiations with Germany. And so my father never got a dime, which meant that my mother didn't get a pension on his behalf. So the way it was set up, and I've been involved with this as a psychiatrist, was like disability. So, depending on how much you worked, this is just for you physically. The other part of reparations was property. But I'm just talking about the person, the slave. So after my father died, my mother appealed. It was obvious if you have high blood pressure at 39 and your parents died in their 70s and you died in your very early 50s, that maybe losing your child, your first wife, being tortured for 3 years and starved for 3 years might have some effect on you physically, okay? So, and in fact, I always tell people, my opinion summary is that the more immediate effect of the incarceration and torture was either on your brain or your heart. Basically broke your heart. So I became a psychiatrist because to me that was more manageable than becoming an internist, because after all my father seemed healthy and he went to the doctor, everyone was helpless to save him. So I thought, the brain was easier. Little did I know. But I had no exposure to mental illness growing up. So when my mother looked to them for help, and when I actually called, because I couldn't, I'm used to dealing with the government. I used to run an inpatient unit, a rehab unit. I had to deal with agencies, with bureaucracy So I thought, I'll call now.
I'll call the
The
claims conference.
Federation, some organization, everyone gave me a different number that was supposed to help you find out what you're entitled to. Zero help. So rude. Horrible.
Who was rude to you?
The claims conference, 3 different people. They threatened me. I don't know their names.
It doesn't matter.
wouldn't
I didn't
say.
mean who they
And
by
this,
name.
And this legal organization, they hung up on me. I asked a question that was totally reasonable about an article I had seen in the World Jewish Congress Weekly Bulletin about money to help Hungarian Jews with home health care. No help. So
You were hoping to get.
I was hoping to get, fortunately, my husband and I are, in good financial situation.
That's just lucky for you.
That's very lucky, and very lucky for my mother. But she has a family. Most of them don't. I said, if they treat me like this, with the Dr. Vilko routine, and my mother, knows also, she has a lot of experience with this. She would always handle it herself. It was very disheartening. And in fact, they have a lot of money from property they took over after the fall of the Soviet Union and after East Germany was no longer separate. All that property that people owned. I'm willing to trade my property in the Ukraine. The Palestinians can go there. But the heirs, most survivors are dead. So the heirs, you read about the art, The Woman in Gold, right? That movie. There's a lot of property, and I don't feel the claims conference should have $1 billion listed on their nonprofit, and there should be survivors starving who can't afford medication.
Okay, how is that possible?
I don't know. All I could say is that one year, a few years ago, someone said to me, do me a favor, look up, what is the document, a nonprofit files?
1099.
Look it up. It's public record, right? And I never saw something with so many zeros. So I don't know how it's possible. There have been court cases. Someone called me recently and said something will be done. But Izzy Liebler, and a few others have been trying their best. But so far, they wouldn't even help me to find help for my mom.
Mm-hmm. I love you so much.
Oh, thank you.
You are
wonderful.
You are wonderful.
More.
We have only touched the surface. You have to promise me to come back. We
So-
haven't really talked about your view of the larger Jewish community and Jewish world now. I want to do that. You are doing fabulous work in so many areas. You have honored me by permitting JBS to sort of piggyback on many of the things you're doing. The audience should know you make many of the interviews possible for us. So, kol hakavod to you, kol tu v'hatzlacha in all you do, you and Sydney and your kids, and you'll sit in that chair often, but I thank you.
I just want to say one thing, I'm a woman to have the last word. So I want to say to all the audience that I do organize programs, and I have had 400 people. But 1 million people could watch on JBS TV. And I think this is the most important organization, endeavor, nonprofit in Jewish life today. And I hope that everyone watching will find it within themselves to make a contribution and also to put pressure on the networks where I live, Comcast and Time Warner, I'm sure there are others, that do not yet have this live, because especially to honor the elderly, which is in our tradition, people that are poor, people that do not have access to a computer like I do, I watch every morning on my iPad. Many people can't do that. So I just want to say that I do these programs. I have made remarkable friends, both from JBS TV and that I was able to bring here, and also to televise programs. But we all need to do our part. So thank you, Mark.
Thank you, sweetheart. The thoughts of Dr. Naomi Vilko, board-certified psychiatrist practicing in Princeton, New Jersey. If you're in the Princeton, New Jersey area, make a note. And as you can see, a profoundly committed Jew working for the state of Israel, the Jewish people, and brings extraordinary insight to the issues confronting Jewish life today. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to any of the ideas expressed by Naomi. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.